With its bloodthirst apparently unquenched by virtue of a $200 million missile strike against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure on Christmas Day, yesterday Russia decided it needed even more bloodshed, and for the fourth time in modern history, shot a civilian airliner out of the sky, resulting in the deaths of totally innocent people. This was murder, and it's a continuation of a policy that goes back decades. It started in 1978 with Korean Airlines Flight 902. It continued in 1983 with Korean Airlines Flight 007, and more recently Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, which was shot down over eastern Ukraine. But more important than the long roster of victims of Russian aggression is the experiences that the people had yesterday on that airplane. Based upon the video and photographic evidence, we can piece together what they went through and what they experienced. I want to make their experience real for you, and that's the subject of this video. On your screen, you're seeing a picture of the actual plane shot down yesterday. This was an Embraer Model 190, which is approximately equivalent to a Boeing 737 in size, carries 114 passengers, and this particular plane was only 11 years old. This plane has a very good safety record, and it's flown by numerous airlines in both the United States and in the European Union. And what you can see from the photographs now are hundreds of perforations in the rear of the airplane where you have the horizontal and vertical tailplanes. This is critical to understand, because it is these control surfaces and the electronics and hydraulics located in this part of the airplane that the pilots use to control both the left and right turning and the up and down pitch in order to fly the airplane. You have other control surfaces on the wings called ailerons, which control roll, but 90% of what a plane does is in the rear, in the tailplane. When those are compromised, either because the control surfaces themselves are no longer aerodynamically efficient, or because there's no ability to move them due to hydraulic or electrical damage, what you have is a plane that can only be controlled in one way. And that is by using the thrust in the engines, and that's it. This is a very imprecise way to try to control an airplane. It's similar to what happened to United Airlines Flight 232, which crashed in Sioux City, Iowa. And when you compare the flight track of the Sioux City United Airlines Flight 232 and the flight yesterday, you can understand what the people inside that airplane went through. The pilots were struggling to maintain altitude. They were struggling to maintain airspeed. They were struggling to try to steer this airplane and bring it in for a smooth landing. Just as with United Airlines Flight 232, the pilots yesterday were heroic and miraculous in their efforts and somehow saved about half the people on that plane. We're going to compare the two flights. We're going to look at the flight track. We're going to look at the videos, and we're going to go through what happened. First, we're going to look at the flight track data, then the video of the final moments of flight leading up to the crash. First, we can see the overall flight pattern. It was supposed to land in Grozny, too much fog, something happened. We are losing some tracking data there, possibly GPS jamming. And we can see towards the end, this is what I want to focus on, because you can see how the pilots are struggling to maintain directional control, speed, and altitude. That's what the differences in the colors mean right there. And as we get closer and closer into a larger view leading up to the accident itself, you can see this pattern of the pilots circling around, really struggling to try to line up the plane to the runway. And what's key about this is we're going to look at United Airlines Flight 232 and another plane where they lost all hydraulics and had to focus on using the engines only in order to fly the airplane. Look at this. The same pattern of flying in circles is what you see here with United Airlines Flight 232. And this is another one with a similar mechanical problems, and that's Japan Airlines Flight 123. It's eerily similar. And here we're going to have just a quick look in a 3D format of the final moments of flight leading up into the accident. There you can see on the right side of your screen wild variations in the speed and altitude. The pilots are really struggling. Now what ends up happening is you'll see are what is known as phugoid oscillations, where the plane is going up and down. Now we're looking at the video, and these are the pilots using the thrust levers going back and forth, on and off, to try to control the altitude and airspeed. And they're entering these oscillations. During this time, everybody in that plane is experiencing positive G's and negative G's. And you can imagine how scary that must have been for everyone. And this went on for a very long time. It must have seemed like for the people on that airplane, hoping they're going to make it on the ground, hoping they're going to see their family again. And this is really what Russia does to innocent people. And just think about what's going on right now. You know, these people just want to get home for the holidays, and instead they're subject to literal terrorism and emotional fear on this flight. And as you continue to watch this, what you can see leading up to the accident is the pilots, through their heroic efforts, are trying their best to bring these people home to their families. But ultimately, as we'll see in the accident sequence, as it terminates here, that what ends up happening is tragically there's a crash. And I want you to understand, looking at this crash, how the airplane impacts the ground. The angle of attack is too steep, and it turns to the side with the right wing contacting the ground first. Why is that key? Well, we're going to look at the United Airlines. There it is. The final moments of flight. Miraculously, half the people on that flight lived. But if you look at the Sioux City United Airlines Flight 232 crash, it's a similar thing. Look at the pattern. The plane coming down, its wings striking first because the pilots can't control altitude using just the engines, and the plane cartwheels and crashes and burns. And again, just like the heroic efforts on this United Airlines Flight 232 in Sioux City, Iowa, we had heroic efforts yesterday by the pilots of the Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243. So really, in looking at this, I want you to understand what people were going through, what they were experiencing. Just put yourself in that moment with them, because that's what we need to have, is compassion for these victims in this moment, and to understand what Russia inflicts on the world.